We're here at the Joplin Fire Department, and we're talking about the events of May 22nd when a F5 tornado tore through the city of Joplin, virtually destroying the center of the city, a mile-wide path, 14 miles long, wreaking tremendous devastation. And we met with the fire chief earlier. We talked about the men and women of the Joplin Fire Department, what an exemplary job they did in managing this event and responding in the true tradition of the fire service with the highest levels of dedication, passion, and integrity. They innovated. They were able to overcome unbelievable obstacles and perform their tasks admirably, setting a bar for the rest of the nation in terms of performance of duty and dedication. And we're very fortunate enough to have some time to spend with the Deputy Chief of Operations, James Perkins, who's been on the job for 20 years now?
22 years.
22 years. And Deputy Chief of Ops. And how many men and women report into the Operations Division?
There are 84 of us on the department total,
Okay.
82, 84, so 76 belong to me.
Wow, wow. Now, if you don't mind, and I know it's painful, and if it's too painful, you don't have to go there, but can you walk us through what you were doing, where you were Sunday evening, and how it all unfolded for you?
Yeah, we had been advised that we had the potential of some weather. I knew that Chief Randalls was going to be attending his son's graduation, so I was trying to keep an eye on the weather in coordination with our emergency management director to try to figure out so that if I needed to interrupt him, I would. Watched this one little cell, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger. Then it started to track east. And it just kept looking more and more ominous as it got close to us. And eventually I decided to call him, call Chief Randalls and tell him, I said, you know, you need to start about getting someplace safe, because I wasn't sure what it was going to do, but I didn't like the looks of it. I also was listening to a VHF radio to try to pick up any chatter that was going on in the area. I started to hear some chatter, and then basically all hell broke loose. When we started to hear a lot of chatter, one of the local news stations actually turned their tower cam and pointed due west. I remember distinctly looking at my wife and going, "That's a tornado, and I'll see you next week." And I just took off, got my stuff on, and headed in. Drove right into the heart of this thing. Luckily, I was on the north side of the storm, but went through hail, rain. The wind was incredible. It started to move my car around, and I thought, well, this isn't good. Then I noticed my windshield crack, and I thought, well, that's not good. But eventually we got there when the storm finally let up and I was able to get in here. Then it was just trying to get my head around what had happened. I could hear Chief Randalls out. He had already gone out to try to do some surveying. And I could hear him constantly calling in that we've got viable victims here, we got viable victims there. And it just didn't stop. I literally couldn't get my head around how big this thing was. It was about 45 minutes after I had gotten here when we finally got somewhat of a handle on what we needed to do. And I had understood that I had lost 2 stations, so that the response capability was going to be restricted. Then it was just trying to figure out how to best use the resources that we had left. And then from that point, when Chief Randalls and I talked, and he said, "You've got to get out and go south." And that was the only marching orders I had, was get south. I went as far south as I could go on Main Street, figuring that it's a tornado, and I've seen tornado damage before. I expected to see roofs down, trees down, and things along those lines. When I got to 20th and Main Street and I came across the first building that was collapsed, that's when I thought, this is a little bit different. And then the farther south I went, I only went another 4 blocks, but it went from just moderate damage to structures that are just simply erased. They're no longer there. That's when I realized that something significant had happened. And again, I think my original on-scene report stated that I was where I was as far south as I could go, and that I needed help. The most minuscule feeling in the world is to get out of your car with your radio and your turnout gear on and realize you have no help, and you have people walking up to you and they want to know what to do. And that was tough. I was trying to figure out how to best serve the folks that had been paying my salary for 22 years, and at the same time not even knowing if all of my guys had gotten out yet. So that was kind of tough.
Wow. Wow. So you're out at the heart of the tornado, just about where your main street, kind of right in the middle of that 7 miles or 14 mile stretch. It's kind of cuts it right in half. So you're standing there by yourself, deploying your troops. What were some of your biggest concerns? I know you had several fires.
Well, yeah, that was my major concern was I kept seeing smoke, and it just kept coming from different spots. I wasn't sure how many buildings or debris piles or whatever you wanted to call them we had burning. But as I started calling for help there, obviously you could hear and smell gas. You could hear the lines going. And then ultimately one of the things that was a problem was, the water. We had talked earlier about the fact that you don't expect a tornado to cause water shortages. But when you have taken out 8,000 structures and all of them are leaking water, it drains your tanks down. So the challenge was we had limited water to fight the buildings that were on fire. Since they were scattered out everywhere, literally the debris piles were only 2 or 3, 5 feet tall at the most. My concern was how far does this go? And if I lose it, how far is it going to go before I can get in front of it?
Because the debris was all interconnected,
Yeah.
almost like it was almost like a giant lumber yard, but on the ground.
Yes, it was.
If people think back to the pictures that we've seen, and we probably put some pictures into the interview so people get an idea what you're talking about. So your concern was a fire could really become a conflagration.
Yeah, I was concerned about where I was going to have the ability to stop this thing, because I've got people that I know I've got people in these buildings. Am I going to be able to get to them? Are the guys going to be able to get there and do what is necessary before the fire gets them? That was horrifying to me, was the fact that they had survived the tornado and we're going to lose them in a fire.
Right.
Didn't want that to happen, so it was trying to marshal whatever resources I could get to start gridding it off.
And I think that's a really important point to get across to people, and I'd never thought about it in all the emergency preparedness classes I've taken for earthquakes and floods and tornadoes. We've all been to EMI and the other schools. I never recall hearing anyone talk about the fact that if you eliminate a significant amount of structures, those small water lines, all those small water lines end up being a significant drain on the system. So you had basically what you had in your tank to fight these fires, because your hydrant system's depleted.
Yeah.
It's down.
Trying to fight the fires off of tank water, the major challenge was to try to keep it into the pile that it started in, or what's left of the residents, and then trying to be able to get additional trucks in to nurse them. That was a problem because of all the trees down and the limbs and the debris everywhere. Was how many trucks could we actually get in there? Then obviously you start looking for heavy equipment, and how are you going to get the heavy equipment in? I know that there were times when I would yell for heavy equipment and somebody would show up in a skid steer. Skid steers aren't very big, but the guys that were using them that night, they were some wizards when it came to having the ability to clear streets. It got to a point where we had, I would assign out units to go and then try to get some heavy equipment with them to help clear the way in.
Right, so they could get past.
So they could get past. It wasn't just the trees and the houses. It was the cars that were just picked up. And we had cars on top of buildings. We had cars on top of cars. We had people in the cars. And then trying to best utilize what resources you've got. How many sets of jaws? How many different teams have we got? That was an issue all by itself. Was trying to coordinate all the folks that had come in.
Right. So you had a really great relationship with your surrounding communities. Years ago, you guys, four major communities had come together and divided up. You call it kind of the super plan. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, back in the post 9/11 world, when the state of Missouri got into the Homeland Security response team business, there were 4 major players in Region D. The city of Joplin, city of Springfield, Branson and Taney County, and then Logan-Rogersville Fire Protection District. And each one of us had decided that while we all had the same base capacity for hazmat, each one of us wanted to develop a specialty. Branson and Taney County wanted to go after the mass casualty response capability, which we wound up using them up here. in that capacity. Logan Rogersville wanted to go after the pure hazmat aspect of it. Springfield wanted to develop their EOD capabilities. And then what we wanted to focus on was heavy rescue, having the ability, and ironically enough, we'd all planned on, we were going to have to go to Branson at some point in time. That's what we thought. Didn't work out that way. They wound up coming to us. But what we did was we didn't fight over the money. We each simply went ahead and picked an area that we thought we could specialize in that wouldn't interfere with the other ones. And the idea was we would all come together if the need ever arose.
So when you were sitting in your car that evening, you knew that your friends from Branson were coming.
Oh, yeah.
And they were going to be able to help you with, and earlier in our conversation, we should probably let folks know that you and the chief were out and your crews were out recovering a lot of deceased. And basically it was identifying where they were, leaving them there. So the Branson team's job was probably to come in and then start setting up the temporary morgues and tagging.
Yeah, they came rolling in with the Disaster Medical Assistance Team, the DMAT. They are a large component of Missouri's DMAT. We wound up using them for that. They were probably more in tune with the EMS folks. Again, I knew Springfield would come in. They've got heavy rescue equipment as well. I knew they were coming. The guys from Northwest Arkansas and then Northeast Oklahoma were absolutely wonderful to deal with. They came running at a minute's notice.
Folks out of Bentonville and
Yeah.
Rogers and
Yeah, we've
Jake
had
Rogers
some.
and his guys. Yeah.
We've had a little cross-border communication with them because part of the Walmart enterprise is on the Missouri side. So from a Homeland Security standpoint, we had some responsibility for it. But they were wonderful to work with. Came in, just folded right into the management system that we had established, and didn't have a single issue with them.
So how does a guy? You're the ops chief. Your family was okay,
Oh yeah.
and your property was.
Yeah, I live up north, so didn't have a single issue.
So you knew your family was safe. So now you've got your town's been torn in half, and you've got members affected. At least their property had been affected, and you've got all hands working, and people coming in. What did you do? How did you manage that influx? Because when we got here Monday morning, it was just what we would say. The expression is it was asses and elbows. Everybody was working. There was nobody standing around looking for what to do. Everybody was working. So how do you eat that elephant? How did you do it?
Well, again, you eat the elephant one bite at a time, and it probably took us between 4 and 6 hours to get a real good handle on what was going on. That's the one thing they leave out in any incident management class is the timeline and how it's going to play out. You're taught in ICS 400 how to deal with volunteers. Well, okay, on day 2. This was happening day 1, actually day 0 plus 45 minutes we had them coming in. It took us about 4 to 6 hours to get the EOC up, established to where we could start capturing the resources, setting up staging areas. While we were doing that as quick as we could, it didn't make a lot of sense to stage because everybody was needed. So it wasn't until 4 to 6 hours later that we started to get the staging area set up where we could catch them, tell anybody that was on their way in, this is where we need you to go. And then from the EOC, we'll go ahead and task you out from there. That is, once we got to that point, everything kind of settled down. And it worked a whole lot smoother. We were able to keep track of folks. We knew where they were. We had a rough idea of how many we had. I know that on the second day, we pushed 750 people through our check-in and sent them out into the field. The second night, we were doing round-the-clock operations, and the second night, we had a pretty big influx, and we had some strong storms coming in. We had some issues with lightning. Some of the folks getting struck. We lost a police officer from Riverside because of that. So obviously at that point, everything has to stop. That's a hard decision to make, is to look at 200 plus people that want to get out there and help and tell them, no, I can't send you out there because you're more valuable to me alive than if you're dead, then you're part of the problem, you're not part of the solution. So I had to stop them. And I had to wait until the weather cleared. When the weather cleared, I had made a phone call down to Springfield. My counterpart down in Springfield Fire Department, Dave Pennington, was an absolute gem of a guy to work with, because I called him up and said, David, this is what I've got. I need some help. And dropped what he was doing, drove up here. When he got here, came walking in, I said, I got 197 people for you. This is the task. And he said, can I have them all? I said, yep. And he said, okay. 3 hours later, he's back in my EOC sitting down talking. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and he said, we got that cleared. And he said, my suggestion is that we wait until morning, and then we'll regroup. And then they just, at that point, it gave us enough of a breather that we gotten the initial tasks done, thought we had gotten as many of the surface folks as we could, and then we could develop a more thorough plan.
Well, and a lot of the folks that came in early helped with that surface. I think the chief made a great comment over lunch. He said, your wife asked you, were you trained for this? And your response was?
Yeah, I had, received training, but the funny part about it is I don't think I used anything more than ICS 200 in the initial responses. It's all single company operations. That's all it is.
And it's everything we learned from day one.
It's everything from day one. The bigger the incident, I think the more simplistic the planning has to be, because you can make a really great plan that is not executable, or you can make a pretty good plan that you can execute and then tweak on the fly. And that's what we had to do. We were making this up as we went along.
So you had, like every city, you'd identified your target hazards and your areas of concern, and unfortunately for you, several of them, the nursing home and the hospital were hit. So talk a little bit about how you prioritized, because at some point you started to weigh resources more heavily to one deployment or another.
My plan, and I was only one of 4 different operational posts that was out there. When I got to where I was at, as far as how I was going to try to develop and deploy the resources, the first captain that came up to me, I'll never forget this. He said, "What do you want done?" I said, and I pointed west, and I said, "Go that way." And he said, "What do you want me to do?" I said, "You'll figure it out." I said, "Go, just start scouting." And the whole point was I wanted to get some recon out there, because I still didn't have any idea how big this thing was. I got to get them out there to start telling me where I'm going to need resources. Unfortunately, my scout team got stuck when they ran into the nursing home. That they had multiple deceased, but we also had lots of folks that were in there that we could get out. That wound up becoming one of the resource sponges that I kept calling them. They were a resource sponge, because anytime I got resources available, I'd ask them, "Do you need any more help?" And they would always say, "Yeah." So I just kept sending them out. The more resources that showed up, the more that I would send over there. And we had 35 or 40 people digging throughout the course of the night, just trying to recover.
You can't imagine, I saw the building, and you can't imagine that anybody survived in that building. So it's just amazing. There's often the question that we ask in the fire service, is that survivable? Now, what do they call it? The rescue profiling.
Yeah,
now.
rescue profile.
And you pulled dozens of folks out of that nursing home alive. But from the hilltop where Mark and I went, and looking down at it from is it St. John's Church? It's a
St. Mary's.
St. Mary's. From St. Mary's Church, you wouldn't think anybody had come out of that building. Just a miracle that anyone came out of that building. And it was, your crews were still on it 10 o'clock the next morning, still going through it. Because the descriptions that you get from you and your men, it's not a collapse. It's not a collapse in the traditional sense of a collapse, is it? No,
collapse rescue, you learn to do void searches and things like that, and you understand that, well, maybe we're going to have a lean-to or a pan. This wasn't a pancake. This was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I mean, it was just smeared is the way it looked. That was the best way to describe it. Everything was just smeared. The debris was just scattered and just smeared out. So there weren't traditional voids. I mean, we were looking, the guys were looking in between and around, beds and bed frames and cars, just trying to figure out where, where folks could be.
And your construction was, ran the gamut.
Oh, yeah.
You had type 1, the hospital right there, all the way down to masonry homes that were built in the 30s and 40s.
Right.
And everything in between, fast food restaurants. You had everything under the sun. To deal with.
You talked about, as far as target hazards, you can deal with one target hazard, but when you're in an area where all of your target hazards have been hit, how do you prioritize that? You know, it realistically wound up becoming a first come, first serve kind of thing, and it wasn't that that was what we planned to do. That's just how it worked out. As the crews would walk out, they would go until they ran into something, and then they would stop. And then, you know, from a management standpoint, you've got to keep pushing beyond that. I've got to keep pushing more resources out past them because there's a lot of area that needs to be done. But it was just simply, you know, there was nothing more technical than a grid search. It's just starting and drawing squares and trying to tell people how to get to where they're going.
So you had all your folks obviously were working from the minute it hit until basically they couldn't work any longer. What were your operational periods like? How did you break it up, Chief?
Well, yeah, for probably the first 3 days, that was one operational period. I mean, from the incident management standpoint, we were going in 12-hour operational sections. But realistically, you know, the folks that were out there were out there. We would try to bring them back at about 7 o'clock and then trade them out. And the biggest mistake I made out of the whole event was not trying to get into some type of a rotation with our folks. I waited probably a day or so longer than I should have to put them on a 36-hour rotation to where I could get some sense of normalcy back. But you know, the guys that
that's
stayed,
hindsight though too.
Yeah.
And you, one of the things that I think is important is that your folks know the town, and they know which houses would have basements. They know what school. You know, they knew, and that insider knowledge is almost invaluable. I mean, you can bring in all the well-intentioned folks you want from around the area, but no one. Chief made during lunch. He said, you know, I would have told somebody to. It's on the corner near the Arby's. The Arby's was gone. Now you only know that if you're a Joplinite or a Joplonian or whatever whatever the word
Joplinite
is.
is what they use.
Joplinite?
So, yeah.
You're a Joplinite. So that's understandable. And everybody, it was the right decision at the time, and it worked out well. So I would say I don't think it was a mistake. It may seem like you pushed them a little hard, but I don't think you could have gotten them to leave.
Well, that was the issue. Was you would tell them to go lay down, and they would all look at you, you know, to a person and say, "No, I've got things to do." The most striking thing is I remember trying to get one of the Station 2 crews. They were the first station that got destroyed, just geographically. They got hit before 4 did, but they wouldn't leave until they had dug their truck out.
Wow.
They refused to leave until they got the engine out of the bay.
Wow.
And
it's part of the team.
Like, okay, so
it's a crew member.
Yeah, absolutely. They you know, no, we're not going to leave anybody behind.
Wow.
And they wouldn't lay down. You know, I kept trying to get them to lay down, but you couldn't. And it wasn't just, you know, it wasn't just our guys. It was everybody that came in. You would try to get them to take a rest break, and they just wouldn't do it. They had things to do.
Now I know there was a lot of this regional teams. Your 4 primary partners all showed up fairly quickly, and a lot of the regional fire departments came in. And you had Missouri Task Force 1.
Yep.
Because they're fairly close by.
Yep.
And they were here within about 16 hours or so and set up. So you had some good support. To tell us about how it progressed from there. In other words, now you know you've got a 14-mile swath that's a half-mile wide. How did it go from there? What was the things that you're proudest of, and because it was an exemplary deployment, it really was.
Probably the thing that we're, you know, most proud of was the fact that we were able to get a handle on, you know, just what was going on, and being able to bring in resources. And I know there were a couple of times that I apologized to Task Force 1 and the St. Louis County folks when they came in, when they called me and said that they were an hour out and that they had 120 folks and 60-some vehicles. Okay, from a staging standpoint, where do you put 64 vehicles? You know, in a town that's already half destroyed. That was comical, actually. You know, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, I'm way too tired for this. But you know, being able to bring these guys in, and again, I had apologized because I felt like I was tasking them underneath what their capabilities were. Especially Task Force 1. You know, this is the big FEMA team that goes to these big heavy buildings that are destroyed. Well, we didn't have any heavy buildings that were destroyed. What we were, you know, other than Home Depot and Walmart, but the destruction out there was so catastrophic that, you know, really, I wasn't sure they were going to be able to be used to the the ability that they felt that they were, capable of. But the ability to bring in all these different resources from all across the country, because it just kept getting farther and farther out, especially when we were using dog teams. The transition from, air sent dogs that are designed to find live folks to the cadaver dogs. We were bringing in dogs from Tennessee, Indiana, Texas. These are all part of the FEMA task forces to bring them in. We were bringing them in for, over a week. We managed to get, when you look at the damage path, we were capable of going back and forth 7 times clearing the grids. We went from one end to the other, turnaround started, and came back the other way. That was a huge, huge accomplishment. And we had been through every inch of the damage path at least 6 times. At least 6 times.
Wow.
Over the course of the days following.
Wow.
And then throw a presidential visit in there and every other visiting dignitary that wanted to come by and take a look. That was what we're most proud of.
Now, what would you recommend? I know you're doing it here, but what would you recommend to other cities, Midwestern cities that are prone to floods, fires, tornadoes, windstorms?
Acknowledge the fact that it can happen. Since 2003, we've had 3 tornadoes come through the area. 2003, we had one in Carl Junction. It was an F3. Then the F4 that went through Pitcher, and then through the middle of Newton County, and then this one. You have to acknowledge the fact that it can happen here, and that the planning process, you actually have to pay attention. Make contacts, get past the petty arguments as far as territorialism, and understand that everybody is going to be committed and everybody's going to be working. You have one common goal, and that is to provide the service to the folks that pay your paycheck. You have to understand and plan for that and know that it can happen.
Now, would you recommend, one of the things that I was talking to some of my friends that came up here, and they said they brought their packs with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that's a great piece of tradition, that's a Midwestern tradition, is that Midwestern firefighters always have a pack, and in that pack you've got water, Snickers bars, peanut butter, whatever you would need to keep you going for 72 hours. And it's just your pack, and you take it with you everywhere you go. And it's a camper's thing, it's a hunter's thing. It's you could get a blowout in the middle of the woods, have to hike out, but you're fine. You've got 3 days worth of water and food. Do you recommend that for?
Oh yeah, the funny part about that is that knowing that the task forces that were coming in would be operating with that, mindset, I didn't really think about where I was going to bunk them down. I figured that they would basically make camp and that they would be fine, and I had a couple of days to worry about that. I was more concerned about all the volunteers that were coming in, all the folks that showed up in flip-flops and had a chainsaw. And there were some spooky folks that showed up, by the way.
I'm picturing a guy in flip-flops and a chainsaw. That's a good visual right there.
Go back and look at the footage. You'll find them. They were out there. But I wasn't worried about them. So that when somebody else had made arrangements to bed down all the responders, the good thing was Missouri Southern had the classes were over. The dorms were standing empty. Southern opened their doors and brought them all in, and we bunked them all down in there, which was completely ahead of my timeline. I was just completely floored when they had actually thought that through, and I thought, whoa, because I knew that the folks coming in would be self-sustained. They would be able to take care of themselves for a couple of days, and I had a little bit of time to try to figure out where to put them.
When you think of the experience that you went through using skid loaders, really, we were out and we saw the fellas with the orange truck, the ASFLAP guys, ASFLOP. They're a tree service, or a nationwide tree service. And then you realize how critical those guys are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because who else can do that as quickly and effectively as those fellas? Because that's what they do. That's their primary mission. We fight fire, but these guys, and they were all over the place. I mean, they were here, and just when you think about the relationships that you need to establish today, not on Monday morning. You need to. They were all, and you could tell they were all in place here in Joplin Sunday night before this ever happened.
I think the one first response agency that gets overlooked, because I had this conversation with our public works director, when he pointed it out to me that they were every bit as much a part of the first response as anybody else was. And it wasn't until we had that conversation and I thought about it and went, you're absolutely right. Without the front end loaders, without the backhoes, and without the other heavy equipment, we can't do anything.
You weren't going anywhere.
That is an invaluable relationship to have, is to, have the ability to sit and talk to, your public works folks and talk to them intelligently and with the respect that's due them. Because without them, there's not much you can do. A big shiny fire truck will only go so far until you meet a 200-year-old oak tree that's not going to give. And you can't push it. The chrome and a gold leaf isn't going to make it go. It's not intimidating.
And our roof saws and our K-12s are just interesting.
Yes, just very interesting.
Because they don't have that depth of cut that the the fellow who gets out and has got that 3-foot blade on that real tree rig and knows how to use it is going to get through that thing. When we were watching them, Mark and I were just thoroughly impressed. The guys were moving trees out of the way as fast as you or I would hook up a car and drag it out of the way.
Yeah, they were going great guns, and we had the streets open. Our public works crew and all the help they had were phenomenal. We had the streets virtually open to where we could pass through almost all of them inside of 2 days, to where we could actually get up and down the streets, and that's the side streets included.
Now, you have an opportunity now to rebuild 2 stations, and I know you were planning on building Station 6 also. So how does this devastation affect your mindset going into that? Because that's going to that landscape's going to look somewhat different.
Yeah.
It's going to come back, but it's going to look different.
Right. It's going to be significantly different. The first question that we have to ask ourselves is that Station 2 was built in 1982. Ironically, 27 years, no, 81 or 82. But it was open, it opened on May 23rd of 1982. So it was open, that many years in a day. The problem is that what does the demographics of the city look like? Are the stations in the right place? Is this an opportunity for us to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, do we want to put them here? We have a singularly unique opportunity with the landscape being redrawn to maybe correct some of the mistakes of the past. Not anything that was overtly done. It's just that you can only look in a crystal ball and pretend you know where things are going to go, but neither you nor I know what's going to happen in 20 years. You do the best you can, and this is using your best educated guess. Do we have the ability to go back and maybe move the stations to some place where perhaps we can get better coverage? I ideally would like to put the stations where they don't line up with each other.
No,
in case a tornado comes through, so I don't lose them both. You can deal with one station down. I know that Chief Randles and I had this conversation. I can deal with losing one from a response capability or response plan standpoint, but losing 2 absolutely threw a huge wrinkle into what we were doing.
Wow. And it's fascinating because right now you have a moratorium on building.
Yep.
So you're just getting things cleared up. Do you foresee them rezoning or doing something creative with that? Because, and I don't know how this works. I mean, if you get your house destroyed and your mortgage company pays you off, do you still own the land, or is it?
Yeah, they still own the land. Yeah.
So the homeowner still owns the land.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
Now, are they required to rebuild there, or I guess they could go anywhere they want?
I don't know. I know that with Mitch's house, when it was destroyed, he's already looked to go elsewhere. He's going to move, but he still owns that plot. Still owns his land. It's a matter of what he wants to do with it. I mean, there are some folks that are in town that are, you've got the rumors that there are speculators in town, buying up pieces and
buying up the land.
Is it going to look different? Yeah, it's going to look significantly different. From a zoning standpoint, I can't really see them doing anything different. The majority of it was zoned as residential, and what was residential will probably stay that way. What was commercial will stay that way. Obviously, everything on Rangeline, all the the stuff up around Home Depot and Walmart, those things will remain commercial, and hopefully we can get them back. This department lives and dies based on the sales tax. So when you lose a Walmart that puts out the volume that store on 15th Street did, that's a huge hit to the local economy. So when
The
you
chief
start,
was telling us it's like the 5th largest producing Walmart.
it's huge. It's always in their top 10, always.
Wow.
So, that's a lot of revenue that we're losing. The plan or the problem there is that if we're based off the sales tax, looking worst case scenario, how long can we sustain the level of capability we have? And hopefully, when everything comes back, the Walmart folks, God love them, have decided they want to be open by November, and I firmly believe that they will be open by November.
American ingenuity,
yeah.
they'll get her done.
Well, Walgreens, we lost a Walgreens at 20th and Rangeline, right in the heart of right in front of Home Depot. They came in, salvaged what they could, cleared it off, and it's almost redone. I mean, they're almost done. Yeah.
The Home Depot.
Not the Home Depot. Walgreens was right in front of it.
Right. We saw that. That's
And
right.
it's all but rebuilt. So they came in and they cleared that lot off and just started throwing blocks down.
So from an operations standpoint, you're the man. What are you going to build into the system going forward? In other words, you gave 2 warnings to everybody, you had your crews hunkered down. What are you going to do operationally just based upon tornado preparedness for our fellow, and I guess it's no longer Tornado Alley, because while I was in Boston 2 or 3 weeks ago, 2 towns got leveled by an F4.
Yeah, we watched it.
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they blamed me. They said, "You're the guy from Oklahoma who just flew in. It's following you." But
Yep.
when I heard tornado, I thought, maybe
Really?
small
Yeah.
twister. It devastated 2
Yeah,
towns. So what would you build into your plans now that you learned from this experience?
Well, obviously, the first thing we're going to do is put safe rooms and everything. That was one of the challenges, was where do we put them? Obviously, you try to find the interior room and all that. And while it worked, some of the guys that brought pictures back were taking pictures looking straight up through the roof. That was disquieting to realize that we got that close. So we're going to put safe rooms and everything. Try to, fortify the buildings as best we can. I know that we had some FEMA engineers come in to look at the disaster area and then look at the collapses to try to figure out.
200-mile-an-hour winds, though, Jim.
Well,
You're not going. What are you going to build? I mean,
well, if we can put a storm shelter that is capable of sustaining or surviving, an F5, that's going to be a plus.
now I was always told, and we built one in my home. And we selected that if the closer you can get to grade, the better.
Right.
So we put ours in ground in our garage. So we go, that's where our safe room is in our home, and that's what we were told. I don't know. That could be.
One of the challenges that we came across, and this is one of those things that you think about 3 o'clock in the morning when you're sitting in an EOC, is all the folks that had those below grade storm shelters that are now underneath all that debris.
Right.
How do they get out?
Right.
And have we done a good enough job? And will the dogs pick up on the fact that
Because
they're
you
there?
are 8 feet below the ground.
Yeah, and you've got all the house that's sitting on top of it. Luckily, we didn't find anybody in a subterranean vault, so that was a plus. But as far as trying to make the stations as safe as we can,
Well, they tell you, you bring your little porta potty down there.
Yeah.
And my wife and I have 2 boxes of wine.
there you go. There you go.
That's
Candlelight. There you go. That's a romantic evening.
it's working for us.
I can find a better way to do it, but
Well,
okay.
and you put some dry goods down there so you can, crackers and such. But why, to not have one is almost crazy.
Well, the guys that were at Station 4, I know for a fact that after the tornado had passed and they stood and watched as much of the destruction as they could, when they realized that all the trucks were destroyed, they literally were tunneling underneath the debris to get to the trucks to be able to get hand tools because they knew they needed hand tools. They got as many hand tools as they could get, and then they ran outside and got in whoever's vehicle wasn't damaged or destroyed, and then they responded out in POVs. The same thing the guys did too, because there was nothing that they could use. They couldn't physically get out of the stations. That's something that not everybody realizes is that we spent probably the first hour of the response with only 2 of the stations in the mix. Because of the huge influx of calls that were coming into the 911 center, our dispatchers were completely overwhelmed. We utilized some of the guys from Station 1 to go down and try to help sort through so we could try to get ahead of it. So instead of chasing our tail and reacting, we could intelligently point ourselves in a direction. We had, the first, 45 minutes to an hour until the guys at 2 and 4 could get dug out. Only about 8 people out there, with the trucks that we had available, and then everything started to, trickle in, and we were able to formulate a better response plan.
And I'll tell you, some of the stuff that was heartening to hear you talk about was some of the lessons that people say that, and I hate this expression when they say, 200 years of tradition and Peter Piper. I think it's 200 years of progress enhanced by tradition, because if you looked at what you were doing with the street markings, it's what they did at Hurricane Andrew. The signs are gone, but you still have to know, especially if you're giving directions to folks from out of town, where the corner of walk and don't walk is.
Right.
So you mark it on the corner. This is 23rd Street. This is, Indiana Street. So people can look at a standard map and say,
right,
this is where we are. It's all great to do the longitude, latitude, but not everybody's carrying a GPS. But you can send people to a corner of if they know you're on 23rd Street and you keep going and you tell them, half mile down you'll find Indiana Street, start there.
Mm-hmm.
And get a guy go out and mark the streets. That was really,
Yeah.
because we saw it, we were there less than 16 hours after, 14 hours after, it's already done.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the amount of work that your men and women accomplished in the few short hours of daylight you had and over that first evening was phenomenal. I mean, you searched a 14-mile long trail of devastation, did a primary search and surface rescue with basically, the 120 or 130 people you had from the community.
Right.
And that's amazing.
It was a Herculean effort, is what it amounted to. The folks that were, I can't say enough about it speaks volumes about the character of the people that work here. That we never turned around, we never ran away. We had a job to do.
And not one complaint.
No.
I haven't heard one person say, and with a fire service, so is he in the room? I hate him. He's gone. Oh, he's none of that. I mean, there's the work ethic, the amount of work you got done, the way you handled it, unbelievable.
No, all the credit goes to the folks that work here, and the guys that are here that responded to and come back every day. We haven't had anybody walk away and say, "Okay, I can't deal with this."
Well, I think the
they keep
leadership,
showing up.
and I would credit the leadership here too. I mean, I think there's been, and I don't mean just Mitch and yourself and the other guys with the, what does he call them, Swiss Army
The
generals,
Swiss Admiral outfits.
Swiss Admiral outfits. Not just the upper echelon, but the leadership at the company officer level and the leadership in the community that the church leaders, the city manager. I mean, there was a real sense of public service here, and you could see it.
I've lived here long enough to know that these folks aren't going to be taken out by this. And the funny part is we had people coming in from all over. There were 2 guys that were retired from FDNY that were working for the Red Cross, and they said they couldn't give anything away. They would drive down the street and they couldn't give anything away. They said everybody would look at him and go, "No, I'm fine. Go talk to him.
Go to the next guy.
Go deal with him."
He needs it more. So as the ops guy, what does Joplin need right now? What would be the best thing that firefighters are listening right now? What do you guys need that your fellow firefighters could do for you?
I think the biggest need. We've had such an outpouring of support. We're good on tools. We're good on gear. We're doing okay there. The biggest challenge is that I've got to get these guys out. We've got Station 2 and Station 4 in RVs that don't work when it gets really hot. I've got to get them in the temporary stations and then move forward and get permanent stations. But as far as equipment and things like that, we're doing okay. I think we're going to be fine.
Okay. Because everybody wants to do something. Everybody wants to make sure you're okay.
Just say a prayer and make sure that you keep us in our thoughts and your prayers, because it's a long road.
Well, I mean, at fire engineering, you need anything, you let us know. We'll put it out, and we'll,
Appreciate that.
We'll help you in any way we can. And again, thank you for taking time to spend with us. I know you got much better things to do. You're trying to get your men relocated and take care of your city, and for you to take the time this afternoon to spend with us. And we really wanted to get your story out so people could hear what a tremendous job you did, and yourself and all the men and women of the Joplin Fire Department and Police Department too, and Public Works Department and the city manager.
It was a team effort.
Just the whole community. Just an amazing deal. While we were out there, We saw folks walking up with their gloves in their hands and, how can I help? And from their heart. I mean, and they weren't fooling around. They wanted to come to work.
Right.
They wanted to help. And
Yep.
we couldn't be, as Americans, we couldn't be prouder of the fact that Joplin, the heartland of America, is still the heartland. And you're the primary example of that. Just that big, broad-shouldered, we'll get her done, check on the next guy kind of deal. So, Chief Jim Perkins, on behalf
Thanks,
of
sir.
everybody in America, all the other firefighters, we're proud of you, and thank
Thanks.
you for what you did. And if there's anything that we can do for you, please let us know.
We'll do it.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks.